It was a quiet evening in a small roadside town in Nevada, the kind of place where the desert wind whistles through empty streets and the sun sinks behind rusted gas station signs. Sitting alone in a corner booth of a worn-out diner was Steven Seagal, once one of the biggest action stars in Hollywood, now just a man trying to find peace in a world that had moved on. He stirred his coffee slowly, staring at the cup as if it held the answers to everything that had gone wrong. The fortune, the fame, the lights, and all gone. Years of giving to charities, helping friends, and bad business deals had left him with almost nothing. In his wallet, only $8 remained. When the waitress came by, she smiled politely, unaware of who he was. "Refill?" she asked. Steven nodded. "Sure. Might be the last one I can afford today," he said softly with a faint chuckle. As he stepped outside, the hot desert air hit him like a wall. That's when he noticed a large biker on the side of the road, crouched next to a broken Harley Davidson. The man's vest had a Hell's Angels patch, his hands greasy, face frustrated. Cars passed without stopping. Steven paused. He could have walked away, he had his own problems after all. But something inside him refused to ignore another man in need. He approached slowly. "Need a hand, brother?" The biker looked up, surprised. "Unless you got a miracle in your pocket, not much anyone can do." Steven smiled faintly. "I've got $8. Maybe enough for some food and water while you figure things out." The biker frowned. "You'd spend your last few dollars on me?" Steven shrugged. "Money comes and goes. Kindness shouldn't." The biker hesitated, then nodded. Together they walked back to the diner. Two men from completely different worlds, an aging Hollywood legend and a rough outlaw, sitting side by side, sharing a simple meal. What Steven didn't know was that this small act of compassion would travel farther than he ever imagined. He didn't know that this small act of kindness would change his life forever. The diner was half empty that evening, with the faint hum of an old jukebox and the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. The waitress looked a little puzzled when Steven Seagal walked back in with the biker. The two couldn't have looked more different. Steven in his faded black jacket and calm presence, the biker in ripped jeans, grease-stained hands, and a heavy leather vest that screamed Hell's Angels. They took a seat in the same corner booth Steven had been sitting in earlier. The biker looked around awkwardly, then leaned in. "You sure you want to buy me dinner, man? You don't even know me." Steven smiled faintly. "You looked hungry." "That's reason enough." The waitress approached, notebook in hand. "What can I get you, fellas?" Steven pointed at the menu. "2 burgers, 2 coffees." "That's all." She nodded and left. The biker frowned as he glanced at the old movie star across from him. "You kinda look familiar," he said slowly. "You some kind of musician?" Steven chuckled. "Something like that." The biker grinned. "Well, I'm Rick. Rick Nolan." "Good to meet you, Rick," Steven replied, shaking his hand. They sat in silence for a moment before Rick sighed. "Broke down about 10 miles outside of town. No cell service. Been trying to fix that Harley since morning. Then I ran out of water." Steven nodded. "Machines can be rebuilt. People can't. You did the right thing stopping." Rick studied him for a moment, confused. "You talk like a monk, man. You sure you ain't one?" Steven just smiled, not answering. When the food arrived, they ate quietly. Rick devoured his burger like a man who hadn't eaten all day. Halfway through, he put the burger down, looked at Steven, and said, "You really used your last dollars on this, didn't you?" Steven wiped his hands with a napkin. "Does it matter?" Rick shook his head slowly, disbelief in his eyes. "Nobody does that anymore. Most people wouldn't even look my way wearing this vest." "You didn't flinch." Steven leaned back. "I don't see patches or tattoos. I see people." The biker nodded, visibly moved. "You know, most folks hear Hell's Angel and think trouble. But we're family, man. We stick together." "Family's a good thing," Steven said quietly. "If you've got that, you've already got everything." Rick didn't reply for a long time. When he finally spoke, his tone had softened. "I owe you, brother." Steven smiled and stood up. "You don't owe me a thing. Just promise me one thing, help the next guy who needs it." Rick stood too, extending his hand. "You got it." They shook hands firmly, and then Rick left to check on his bike. Steven watched from the window as Rick pushed his motorcycle down the road into the fading light. The setting sun threw an orange glow across the diner's cracked windows. Steven sat back down, finishing his cold coffee, staring into the horizon. The waitress came by again. "You know, not many folks would have done what you just did," she said, smiling. Steven shrugged lightly. Doesn't take money to be kind. He left a small tip, all he had left, and walked out into the dusk. The road was quiet again, just the faint roar of Rick's Harley finally starting in the distance. Steven smiled faintly. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace. As the night crept in, the old star walked back to his small rented cabin outside town. He had no idea that the next morning, the sound of 100 roaring engines would shake the desert ground beneath his feet. Because the man he'd just helped, that rough, tired biker, was no ordinary traveler. He was the vice president of a major Hells Angels chapter, and word of Steven's kindness was already spreading faster than wildfire. Have you ever helped someone even when you didn't have much yourself? Tell us your story in the comments, we'd love to hear it. And also, drop your country and city name below. Let's see where our amazing viewers are watching this story from. The sun hadn't even cleared the mountains when Steven Seagal awoke to a low rumble. At first, he thought it was thunder rolling through the Nevada desert. But within seconds, the sound grew louder, heavier, deeper, like 100 lions growling in unison. He sat up, blinking in disbelief. The vibrations shook the thin walls of his cabin. He walked to the window, parting the dusty curtains, and froze. Stretching down the road were dozens upon dozens of motorcycles, their chrome shining under the early light. The riders, all in black leather vests with Hells Angels patches, lined up like a small army. Engines roared, the air thick with exhaust and adrenaline. Steven stepped outside, barefoot, his long hair tied back, a cup of coffee in hand. He squinted into the rising sun as the line of bikes came to a halt in front of his gate. The sound died down, leaving behind a heavy silence. From the front of the formation, a large man with tattoos down both arms dismounted. He had a commanding presence, tall, muscular, and carrying the same aura of authority Steven used to see on movie sets. His vest read, Vice President, Hells Angels, Nevada Chapter. The man took off his helmet and grinned. "Morning, brother." Steven tilted his head, recognizing the face beneath the beard. Rick nodded. "Didn't think I'd see you again, huh?" Steven smiled faintly. Not like this, no. Behind him, nearly 100 bikers sat silently on their Harleys, their engines cooling, their eyes fixed on the man who had helped one of their own. The energy was tense, respectful but uncertain. Rick walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You remember what you told me last night? That money comes and goes, but kindness shouldn't?" Steven nodded slowly. "I remember." Rick's grin widened. "Well, brother, we don't forget kindness either." He turned and waved his arm. Instantly, 2 bikers wheeled forward, a large black tarp-covered shape. The crowd of bikers revved their engines in rhythm, building suspense. Steven looked at the covered object, confused. "What's this?" Rick smirked. "Patience, old man. You'll see soon enough." One biker yanked the tarp away, revealing a brand new custom-built Harley-Davidson, its frame polished midnight black with silver engravings. On the gas tank, hand-painted in bold cursive letters, were the words, "For the man who gave his last dollar. Respect from the angels." For a moment, Steven didn't move. His usually stoic face softened, eyes glistening in the morning light. The crowd erupted in cheers and the thunder of engines echoed across the valley. Rick stepped closer, holding out a set of keys. "You fed a hungry man when you had nothing left. That doesn't go unnoticed in our world. We take care of our own." Steven took the keys slowly, his fingers trembling. "You didn't have to do this," Rick laughed. "We know." "That's why we did." The 2 men clasped hands, firm, brotherly, genuine. Around them, bikers revved their engines in salute, a wall of sound and emotion. As the crowd quieted, Steven looked over the sea of faces. Rough men, scarred by life, but bound by loyalty. "You know," he said with a faint smile, "I spent my last $8 thinking I'd lost everything. Guess I was wrong." Rick grinned. "You didn't lose a thing, brother. You gained a family." The crowd roared in agreement. Dozens of voices shouted, "Respect," as they raised their fists and revved their engines once more. For the first time in years, Steven felt something he hadn't known he was missing: belonging. These weren't movie fans or fleeting admirers. They were people who understood loyalty, who valued honor more than fame. He ran his hand along the bike's gleaming surface, tracing the engraving of his name. It wasn't about the motorcycle, it was about what it represented. A reminder that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in moments of compassion that echo back when you least expect them. The engines thundered again, echoing across the desert like a storm of gratitude. If you woke up to find 100 bikers outside your house, would you panic or step outside to see what they wanted? Comment your answer below and tell us what you'd do in that moment. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the desert in gold. The echo of revving engines slowly faded as the crowd of bikers dismounted, gathering around Steven Seagal and Rick. Dust swirled through the dry air, carrying the smell of fuel, leather, and freedom. Steven stood beside the gleaming black Harley they'd gifted him, still trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't every day that a man woke up broke and went to bed surrounded by 100 bikers calling him brother. Rick looked around, then raised his hand. The group instantly fell silent. There was a respect in the air, a discipline that contradicted the stereotypes people had about the Hells Angels. Rick turned back to Steven, his voice deep and commanding. "There's something you don't know, man. The guy you helped yesterday, that was me. But I didn't tell you the full story." Steven raised an eyebrow. "I figured there was more to it." Rick smiled faintly, nodding. "Yeah, see, I wasn't just any biker passing through. I'm the vice president of the Nevada chapter of the Hells Angels. I've seen things, brother, good and bad. But that day I was riding to clear my head. My best friend, our chapter president, passed away last week. I was angry, broken. When the Harley broke down, I sat on that road thinking maybe the world was done with me." He paused, looking Steven straight in the eyes. "And then you showed up." The crowd shifted, a few heads nodding silently. Rick continued. "You didn't ask who I was, didn't look at the patch, didn't judge. You just offered kindness. That $8? That was the first act of humanity I'd seen in weeks. You didn't just give me food, man. You gave me faith again." Steven's jaw tightened, emotion flickering behind his calm demeanor. He said quietly, "We all need someone to remind us who we are." Rick smiled. "Exactly. And when I got back to our club last night, I told the boys what you did. They didn't believe me at first. So I said, then let's show him what brotherhood looks like." He gestured around him, and the entire group cheered, revving their bikes in a rhythmic roar that rolled like thunder across the valley. Steven looked out at the crowd, faces rough and scarred, yet eyes filled with respect. He could feel it. This wasn't pity, it was honor. Rick walked up to him again, lowering his voice. "You know, when we heard it was Steven Seagal who helped me, we almost didn't believe it. Hollywood guys don't buy food for strangers. They don't talk about respect, they talk about fame. But you were real. That meant something." Steven smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised, Rick, fame fades fast. But being human, that lasts." Rick nodded. "You said something yesterday that money comes and goes, but kindness shouldn't. That hit me hard, brother. So today we wanted to return that kindness tenfold." He turned and pointed at the motorcycle again. "This ain't just a bike. It's a symbol. The black paint represents struggle, the silver lines and redemption. We built it overnight in our garage. Everyone pitched in. Even the kids." Steven stared at it, speechless. His hand brushed the engraved lettering. "For the man who gave his last dollar. Respect from the angels." Rick's voice softened. "We wanted to remind you too, man. You didn't lose everything. You just hadn't met the right people yet." Steven looked around again, his eyes glistening. The roar of bikes, the leather, the patches, it all felt foreign yet familiar. For the first time in years, someone had given him something without asking for anything in return. He took a deep breath. "Rick, I don't know what to say," Rick laughed. "Don't say anything, brother. Just ride." The men erupted in cheers again, clapping him on the back, shaking his hand. The moment felt electric, like a scene straight out of a movie, but this time it was real. Steven swung his leg over the custom Harley, gripping the handlebars. The chrome reflected the morning light, and for the first time in years he smiled, genuinely, freely. Rick started his own bike, shouting over the noise, "You ready to roll, Seagal?" Steven smirked. "Born ready." With that, the engines roared to life again, 100 Harleys thundering in unison, rolling down the dusty Nevada road with Steven in the lead. The sound was deafening, powerful and pure. To the world, it might have looked like a gang on a joyride. But to those men, it was something sacred, a tribute to loyalty, respect, and the unspoken bond that kindness creates. As they rode off together, the small diner from the day before stood quietly in the distance, and the same place where one man's last aid had started a story that would soon inspire millions. The convoy of roaring motorcycles thundered down the open desert road, cutting through the wind like a moving storm. Steven Seagal rode at the front, his new Harley glinting in the sunlight. The leather jacket the bikers had given him flapped behind him like a flag of rebirth. Dust rose in waves as 100 bikers followed his lead, men who had lived hard lives, who'd seen pain, violence, and redemption. For the first time in a long time, Steven felt something powerful deep within him. Peace. After about 20 miles, the group pulled over at a wide rest stop overlooking the desert. The air was still, the horizon endless. One by one, the bikers parked their rides, the engines falling silent until only the sound of wind remained. Rick took off his helmet and looked at Steven. "You know, brother, we don't usually ride for anyone. But today's different." Steven smiled faintly. "I can tell." Rick turned to the group. "All right, boys, gather up. We've got something to say." The men formed a loose circle around Steven, boots crunching on gravel, leather creaking with movement. They looked to Rick, who nodded toward Seagal. "This man right here," Rick began, voice booming over the wind, "showed us what real respect looks like. Didn't matter who we were. Didn't matter what patch we wore. He saw a hungry man and helped." The crowd murmured in agreement. Steven raised a hand, humbly shaking his head. "I just did what anyone should do." Rick grinned. "Maybe, but not everyone does." Steven looked at the sea of faces, scarred, tattooed, hardened by the world, yet softened in that moment. He took a step forward. "You know, I used to think success was about what you earn, the cars, the movies, the fame. But you lose enough of it and you realize something. None of it fills you up. What matters is how you treat people when nobody's watching." The men nodded quietly, their eyes locked on him. Steven continued. "That day, I didn't see a biker. I saw a man who looked like he needed help. I didn't do it for a camera or a story. I did it because I've been there too. I know what it feels like to be looked down on, to be misjudged, to be treated like you don't matter." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And that's the world we live in now, one where kindness feels rare. But you know what? The smallest act can change someone's life. Sometimes it only takes $8 and a little heart." The crowd went silent. Even the wind seemed to still. Rick smirked. "You hear that, boys? The man's preaching truth." Laughter rippled through the group, but there was a quiet respect behind it. Steven looked down at his hands, rough, calloused, marked by years of training and work. "You gave me this bike, but what you really gave me is something much deeper. You reminded me that humanity still exists, even in the hardest places, even in men who the world misunderstands." Rick nodded. "That's the thing, brother. People see our jackets and think criminals. They don't see the veterans, the fathers, the brothers. We've lost people, same as anyone, but we live by one rule, loyalty, and today you earned that." Steven smiled softly. "And you earned mine." Rick chuckled, looking around at his men. "Guess we just recruited a Hollywood star, huh?" The bikers cheered, laughing, clapping Steven on the back. But Steven raised his hand again, his voice calm yet strong. "Let me tell you something, fellas. The world doesn't need more fame or more money. It needs more real people. People who stand up when it matters, who help even when they don't have much to give." He took a deep breath, the desert wind brushing against his face. "If there's one thing I've learned, kindness doesn't cost a thing. But its impact? It can echo for a lifetime." The bikers stood in silence, many lowering their heads, feeling the weight of his words. These were men who had been called outcasts, rebels, even monsters. Yet here was a man they admired, speaking to their hearts without judgment. Rick broke the silence with a deep, gravelly laugh. "You know, brother, I think you just became an honorary angel." The crowd erupted into cheers again, engines firing up as if on cue. Steven smiled wide, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Then I'll wear that title with honor." Rick clasped his shoulder. "You already do, brother. You already do." As the engines roared once more, the desert seemed alive, the air thick with energy and respect. Steven looked at the horizon and whispered almost to himself, $8 and a lifetime of lessons." Rick overheard and laughed. "Guess you got a pretty good return on your investment." Steven chuckled, starting his engine. "Yeah, the best one yet." And with that, the group roared back onto the highway, their shadows stretching across the desert sand, a living symbol of loyalty, redemption, and the power of one small act of compassion. Have you ever done something kind that came back to you in an unexpected way? Tell your story in the comments. Your words might inspire someone today. By the time the sun began to sink behind the Nevada mountains, Steven Seagal and the 100 bikers had returned to town. Dust covered their jackets, but their spirits were sky high. Wherever they rode, people stared. A Hollywood star and an army of Hell's Angels side by side, like a scene straight out of legend. At a red light, a man pulled out his phone and started filming. Then another. Within hours, those videos began circulating online. Steven Seagal rides with Hell's Angels after helping one in need. The headline exploded across social media. Clips of Steven shaking hands with the bikers, smiling and giving a small speech spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, it had over 10 million views. But what really captured people's hearts wasn't the fame or the bikes. It was the message. Viewers were stunned to learn that Steven had given away his last $8 to help a stranded biker, not knowing that the man he helped was a leader of the Hell's Angels. In the days that followed, media outlets tried to chase down the story. Paparazzi waited outside Steven's small Nevada cabin, expecting some scandal or publicity stunt. But Steven wasn't there for fame anymore. He was out on the road again, riding quietly, living simply, keeping his promise to stay humble. When a reporter finally caught up with him at a gas station, Steven smiled and said, "You want the truth? I didn't help him because he was a biker. I helped him because he was hungry. That's all there is to it." That quote became the headline the world needed soon. News anchors everywhere were replaying clips of the bikers rolling through the desert, engines roaring like thunder with Steven at the front, a symbol of unity and redemption. The Hell's Angels, known for their rough reputation, suddenly found themselves in a different light. People saw the humanity behind the leather. Donations started flooding into veteran shelters, biker-run charities and food drives, all in the name of kindness. Rick called Steven one night, laughing through the phone. "You see what you started, brother? The world's talking about us like we're angels for real." Steven chuckled. "Guess they finally saw the hell part isn't as strong as the angel part." Rick paused for a moment, then said softly, "You changed something, man. You reminded people that respect isn't about titles or money, now it's about heart." Steven didn't reply right away. He looked at the old photos on his wall, memories of fame, movie premieres, and martial arts tournaments. But none of those moments felt as pure as the dusty ride with 100 bikers who gave him back something priceless: faith in humanity. The next week, Steven was invited to a charity event in Los Angeles. He usually avoided the spotlight, but this time he agreed. When he took the stage, the crowd went silent. Cameras flashed, but his focus stayed on the message. "I've been called a lot of things in my life. Actor, fighter, star," he began. "But last week I was called something I never expected. Brother. And that word means more to me than any title I've ever had." The audience applauded softly. He continued, "When I met Rick on that road, I didn't know who he was. I didn't care. I just knew he needed help. We've all been there. Lost, tired, looking for someone to care. I gave him my last $8. I thought it was nothing. Turns out it was everything." The crowd fell completely silent. "Kindness doesn't ask for attention," Steven said. "It just acts. And sometimes the smallest act can ripple further than you'll ever imagine." He stepped back from the microphone, his words hanging in the air. That clip went viral within hours, amassing millions of views worldwide. People began sharing their own stories of compassion, small acts that changed lives. Hashtags like $8 lesson and respect and ride began trending globally. Even biker clubs from other countries started holding kindness rides in honor of the event. Groups of bikers delivering food, helping veterans, and raising money for shelters. Steven watched it all unfold quietly from his porch. Rick called again that evening. "You seeing this, brother? You started a movement." Steven smiled. "No, Rick, we started it," Rick laughed. "Fair enough. Guess the angels have a new kind of mission now." "Yeah," Steven said, gazing out at the sunset. "A mission worth every mile. If one small act of kindness could inspire a million others, why would you do it? Tell me in the comments, what's one good deed you'd do if you had the chance today?" A week later, Steven Seagal sat alone on his porch in Nevada. sipping black coffee as the early morning sun spread across the desert. His new Harley sat parked nearby, gleaming softly in the light. The engraving, "For the man who gave his last dollar, respect from the angels," shone like a quiet reminder of how everything had changed. The world had moved fast since that day. News outlets, social media, and even talk shows were still buzzing about the $8 story. But for Steven, it wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about the ripple effect that kindness had unleashed. Across America, biker clubs began organizing charity rides. They called them the Seagal Runs. Groups of bikers, once seen as outlaws, were now delivering food to the homeless, visiting veterans, and raising money for single mothers. Each time they'd hand over the donation with a note that read, "A small act of kindness goes a long way." Rick called almost every night with new stories. "Brother, you won't believe this," he said one evening. A biker in Texas bought groceries for an old lady who couldn't afford them. When the cashier asked why, he said, "Because Steven Seagal gave his last $8." Steven laughed softly, shaking his head. "You're telling me I started a kindness chain with pocket change?" Rick chuckled. "You started a movement, brother." That same week, Steven received an unexpected letter. It was handwritten, rare in this digital age, and stamped with the insignia of the Nevada Highway Patrol. Inside was a simple note. "Mr. Seagal, I was one of the officers who doubted you when we heard rumors of your biker story. I thought it was another celebrity stunt. But after watching the footage and hearing your words, I realized I was wrong. You reminded me why I joined the force, to protect, not to judge. Thank you for that lesson. Respectfully, Sergeant Alan Brooks." Steven folded the letter carefully, his eyes lingering on the words, "not to judge." He smiled faintly. Later that evening, he drove to a small community center where local kids practiced martial arts. They didn't know who he was, and just an older man with calm eyes who came to watch. When one of the kids asked, "Are you really Steven Seagal?" he nodded and smiled. "Yeah," he said, "but you can just call me Steve." He watched them spar, their laughter echoing through the hall. Before leaving, he spoke to the group. "Discipline makes you strong," he told them, "but kindness makes you powerful. Remember that." That clip, filmed by a parent, had found its way online too. Within hours, it went viral again, reaching millions. People across the world began using the phrase "the $8 lesson" as a metaphor for compassion. A teacher in Japan wrote, "Be someone's $8 on her classroom board." A hospital nurse in Canada pinned a note to a patient's bed. "Someone helped me today, I'm passing it on." And in the Philippines, where Manny Pacquiao heard the story, he posted a video saying, "Real fighters fight with their hearts," and Steven Seagal proved that. But Steven never sought the attention. He stayed grounded, spending most days in the quiet countryside teaching local kids self-defense and helping veterans with meditation training. Fame had faded, but peace, that stayed. One evening, Rick and a few of the angels rode up to visit him. As the bikes parked outside, Steven greeted them with his calm smile. Rick handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" Steven asked. Rick grinned. "Donations from our last ride. We're starting a fund, the $8 Foundation. Helps anyone struggling with food or shelter. Figured we'd name it after the man who proved how far $8 can go." Steven looked at the envelope, then back at Rick. "You don't need my name on it." Rick shrugged. "Maybe not. But the world needs the reminder." The two men exchanged a long, quiet handshake, a bond built not from fame or power, but from shared humanity. As the bikers rode off into the sunset once more, Steven stood at his porch watching the horizon. The sound of engines faded into the wind, leaving behind only peace and the soft whisper of the desert. He smiled to himself and murmured, $8. That's all it took to change everything. If you believe one small act can spark a wave of kindness, type respect in the comments. And remember, you never know how far your $8, your time, or your heart can go.